and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which I say do not count, even if we're like live streaming this debate over the internet, because that makes me like hold tighter to that promise even more, that they do not count. And I'm saying this live to the millions or the three of you out there. They just don't count, but I own them all because of course I do.
All right, I'm Dapper Dan Gavoston, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say definitely count, and that's unwavering no matter the format. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy, also regardless of the format, year, what have you. I'm no closer to owning a copy of Amazing Fantasy 15 than I was last time I said this.
But doesn't it hurt you a little more to say that, Dan, in front of all of these people out there? Like they could just be pointing to you in real time and laughing at your lack of Amazing Fantasy number 15.
I'm sure they all are. And I will check the comments later just to like reap the punishment that I'm sure I'm owed.
I don't want to know about what punishment you reap, Dan. Welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of Amazing Spider Man Volume 7.
Yeah, if you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube and leave us a review. And Mark has been, I don't know, not so subtly alluding to the fact that we are live. The return of Amazing Spider Talk Live is here and upon us. During COVID, we rolled out this whole feature of Amazing Spider Talk Live, and it was a lot of fun, except for behind the scenes technically, where I lost whatever hair I had remaining. But we have found another way to do it that's way less hassle, full of hassleful. Is that
Hassle
even a
free.
thing?
Yeah.
Hasselhoff. We are returning to it again, and this is our first episode testing it out. So we thanks to everybody who's watching us in that format. And if you haven't listened to us live and you'd like to join us, we typically record Sunday nights at around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. You can check out our channel, subscribe, set up some notifications, and you'll get it there. So Amazing Spider Talk Live. It's alive for now until we get tired of doing it again. But we do hope that you'll join us. In the meantime, we do have some sad news to kick off the show with this week. By the time most people are hearing this, it might be old news, but the news just broke for us early this morning, Mark. And what is that news?
Yeah, the passing of Peter David. Peter David, of course, was a longtime comic book creator. He enjoyed some prodigious runs on Spectacular Spider-Man, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. He wrote probably one of my all-time favorite single issues of Spider-Man from the '80s, The Commuter Cometh. Um, he also wrote X-Force, Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man 2099. He created Spider-Man 2099. I mean, on and on and on. Peter was a guest on our show back in 2013 at New York Comic Con. So you can go back and check that out too. Peter had been sick for quite a while. Sadly, had a Kickstarter to raise money for his medical bills. I mean, that opens up a whole conversation about the independent contractors and their how their comic creations can't seem to pay for their health care, Dan, but we won't get into that right now. But rest in peace, Peter David. He has a heck of a legacy on this medium and for the Spider-Man character as well, and really sad to hear of his passing today.
Yeah, and co-creator of I think still probably the coolest alternate Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2099. Still a creation I think like that's unlike anything else that the Spider-Verse has seen. And yes, rest in peace, Peter David. And Mark and I are going to be recording something in addition to this intro to this podcast to commemorate, Peter's passing and some of our own show's history with Peter. So keep your eyes and ears open for that over the next few days. But we did want to acknowledge it on the show.
All right. Well, this podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early reviews and seasonal episodes, exclusive podcasts, and artwork, and help us keep this podcast going ad-free, please go to amazingspidertalk.com and click on the big Patreon button to sign up.
Today on the show, Mark and I will be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 7, Number 4. This issue was written by Joe Kelly. The cover features artwork by Pepe Larraz and Marte Gracia. The interior pages feature artwork by Pepe Larraz, colors by Marte Gracia, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on May 21st, 2025. So, Mark, why don't you hit us with a recap of the events of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 7, Number 4?
Gladly, Dan. We'll see the live stream how many times I flub this. We open at Rand Enterprises, and boy, Peter's new boss is really displeased with Brian's recommendation, and who can blame her? Peter is erratic, unreliable, and, well, you know, everything we've known about Peter for years now. If it were up to her, it'd be well past the time for him to hit the unemployment line yet again, but Brian has good news. Peter is on drugs. How is that good news, Brian? Meanwhile, Spidey is fighting Flaming Sword Hobgoblin, and he's still tripping lilies, having flashbacks about Ben and May and teenage hormones while he tries to unpack Kingsley's motives. During the fight, Kingsley gets a heads up that those nasty people at Rand Enterprises are looking into this whole Coca-Cola, well, not Coca-Cola, King Cola scheme, or Queen's Cola. What kind of cola is it, Dan? It's
Queen's
Cola.
Cola. Queen's Cola.
I'm just, you see, live media, folks. And he wants Itsy Bitsy to finish off Spider-Man while he uses his wings to stop Peter's co-workers for good. Peter overhears the whole thing, and it's like all his failures happening at once again. He has to save Brian, or he'll have even more blood on his hands. We get a literal floating heads of guilt and shame from Larraz here, and we're playing the hits with Uncle Ben, Harry Osborn, look out, Captain Stacy, and Ben Reilly. Okay, so maybe Ben's not quite a hit, but kudos for the Spider Office for trying to add gravity to that failure 3 years too late. Peter sees Shay too and wonders how long until she joins the ranks of the people he let down with dire consequences. And ooh, we got some Johnny, Jazzy, Ramita looking Gwen and MJ reminding us of the time Peter blew his love life twice. Ouch. That brings us back to Itsy Bitsy and Spider-Man, and Daddy is ripe for the killing here. We get another flashback to one of my podcast sessions from COVID. Oh, wait, no, that's actually Peter and the Freaktastic Four drinking themselves to oblivion. You see, I drank a lot during the COVID season.
I can vouch for that.
We flash forward a bit as Peter pays homage to the porcelain gods while May is sitting nearby. She lets him know he's entitled to his youth, even some indiscretions with alcohol, but she doesn't understand why he's pushing Ben and her away. Regardless, they're gonna love Peter no matter what, come what may. So stop pushing away the good things because you're afraid to lose them, Peter. All right, damn. Some onion cutting going on in the podcast studio, Dan. I'll be good in a second. Okay, so now that I'm properly gutted, we are back in the present moment with Spidey hugging Itsy Bitsy, professing his love, only to realize what's going on, and he revokes his I love you, driving Itsy into a psychotic frenzy. Spidey properly vanquishes Itsy Bitsy, and he's out to run down Kingsley because, god dang it, he's not going to lose another friend. And there you have it, folks.
Awesome, Mark. Well, for anybody who's kind of hung out on social media or checked out Nick Lowe's Twitter feed, and I warn you, don't read the replies. But he's been hyping this issue up since the release of number 1. Now, okay, not anything new to see Nick Lowe hyping up a Spider-Man comic, but it was interesting because he had been hyping that, like in the wake of issue 1, he said, issue 1's great, but really it's issue 4 is the one that I'm really most excited for people to read, which, issue 1s are usually like the big, bombastic issue that supposed to get you on the train. And so I thought it was interesting. I mean, maybe he just wants you to buy 4 more issues or whatever, but he clearly wanted us to hang around long enough to see what happened in this issue and thought it would be something that would really maybe get people to jump on this run even more solidly if issue one didn't already convince them of doing so. Do you, Mark, think that he was right to kind of hype up issue four in this way?
Um, I think there is an obvious moment in issue four, the Peter and May scene, which I think is, um, you know, a side of Spider-Man comics in terms of its emotional um, peaking that we really haven't gotten in a long time. And I think, not for nothing, it's, you know, we are of the critics of this comic book series that have been kind of clamoring for not necessarily a moment just like this, but like, some kind of emotional grounding, certainly around Peter and his inner monologue and his past, and what it means to be Spider-Man, and what we're, you know having a book that says something about Spider-Man, and that this comic and that scene certainly says it. Um, I am probably going to end up being the contrarian throughout this entire episode, in that I liked this comic very much, but I don't know if I liked it any more than some of the previous installments of this series we've gotten so far. I think volume 7 is off to a very strong start, probably the strongest. I think this is even a better first arc than what Zeb Wells had done back in, whatever year that was, 22,
Yeah,
20.
22, I believe.
So it's been 3 years, and like it feels like we're really kind of kicking things off in a good way. So like it's not this is not a, oh, I didn't like this issue. I like this issue very much. I don't know if it's that much more elevated than what we got before, nor do I think it's in a pantheon of anything just yet, because I still think it's premature to jump to that conclusion. But if Nick Lowe is hyping this issue up online because he's going to indicate that this is setting the table for a really emotionally grounded Spider-Man comic book series for the foreseeable future. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that he wants to spend his whatever little, I shouldn't say whatever little, but whatever cachet he has left on the social media is trying to get people to buy these comics. This is certainly more worth the Nick Lowe hype than, this is the greatest Sinister Six story since Amazing Spider-Man #1, when he famously fought the Sinister Six, and not the Chameleon and the Fantastic Four. Uh, so there you go.
Yeah, well, and partially, like I think you're couching your opinion in that, and I'm opening myself up here for another Mark monologue. It is like, I was pretty through the roof on this issue in my hype of it before you read it. So like, if Nick Lowe was saying one thing, I might have been like gassing it up even more. And so like, yeah, I feel like, while you might feel like the contrarian, it's only because I think I messaged you early on that I felt like this was one of the strongest Amazing Spider-Man comics we've gotten in years. And I did reread 1 through 4 this week, just because I wanted to kind of feel about how the flow was going. And I think it's always good to kind of like, when you've got a multi-part story like this, to consider how it plays out across the arcs, and how it's sort of paced. And I do agree with you. I think this is like kind of on par with the other 3 that we've gotten. I think it's my favorite issue of the run, if only because it's allowed to kind of like deliver on some of the climaxes that have been building. But I think the quality has been really high and consistent so far. But I do think that emotional scene that you alluded to, and we're going to get into in a minute, is so great that it really puts it, up above the others for me. And so I think it was absolutely right to hype this up, and it's cool to see them hyping up like a Peter moment,
Right.
like it's also like hyping up a flashback, like
Right.
if that's really what the thing that they're hyping up. I mean, there's a great Hobgoblin fight in this too, and a fun itsy bitsy fight that's visually dynamic. But the real showstopper is a Peter is a middle schooler flashback. And boy, has it been a long time since Amazing Spider-Man has thought something like that was worth elevating into the hype chambers instead of this is the most violent fight. This is the biggest scenario Spider-Man will ever be in. Instead, it's a hype about something genuinely quiet.
Mm.
And I think that's refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said this as much, if not in our last review, Dan, in one of the first three that we've done so far. I mean, this is a comic book series that is inherently interested in Peter Parker, and like as Amazing Spider-Man should be, but it hasn't been for a really long
Yeah.
time now, like a long time. I mean, like maybe we would get an issue here and there, but like despite the pushback I'm sure I'm going to get from like the Nick Spencer evangelist, I don't think that book was as interested in Peter as this one is, by not by a long shot. So it's this is yeah. I mean, like I said, if we're gonna finally start hyping this book because it's like, hey man, we're gonna tell Peter Parker stories and make you care about Peter as a character again. I mean, that's great. I mean, again, it's like this was something I wouldn't call it a traumatic scene, but it was an emotional scene, and yet I we got other we've had hype for other stories that were supposed to traumatize us, and I was only traumatized by the fact that I probably spent $9.99 for that story. I bought a variant or two, but you know what I mean, like so. Anyway,
Yeah, no, I get it. One other thing, like before we get into the sort of breakdown of all the different beats going on here, I did want to like really commend, the sort of like a juggling act that is this book right now. I feel like and we've talked off mic, but like I feel like there's going to be some pushback on me here about like, do these things all relate to each other? But I do think like in a more sort of classic Amazing Spider-Man style, and we just got done, recording an episode with Jerry Conway that's on our Patreon discussing his Web of and Spectacular runs, which I think do a tremendous job of the sort of interweaving multiple narratives within each other that maybe don't have everything to do with each other, but nevertheless keep the world of Spider-Man and Peter Parker alive. Like I think a book like this really is allowed to kind of hit the high marks that it does because of how Joe Kelly has found clever ways to keep the story naturally engaged with itself, even down to like, why does Hobgoblin split up from Itsy Bitsy at the end of the book? Well, he's got to fly across town with his wings, and she can't travel that fast, right? And so that's going to send him off to Brian at Rand Enterprises. And so, like, I think this book has done a really excellent job of finding natural ways to deviate from the main action to keep all of the different parts of it engaged at once, even if they're not all appearing in every issue. Whether it be like the Rand Enterprises plot of like Peter having a job there and Brian's like research into like whatever Peter's been drugged with. You've got like the motives of the villains with the Hobgoblin and what he's doing and how that was seeded through the background of the issues and in his language. You've got like the drinking element that really takes a forefront here, whether it's the soda cans or at the party where we are reminded that Peter drinks water, and it's all done like I think fairly subtly. And rewards those who like pay attention to details. And I really have enjoyed that, as opposed to say, and again, I know this is a constant thing we like to beat on, the sort of like Craven introduction at the beginning of the Nick Spencer run, where it was like just pulling out a Markism, the attached with the rivet gun. Like I don't feel any rivet gunning really in this comic. It is like the most kind of like free flowing this book has felt in a very long time. Even when I think some of the best runs, like Dan Slott's, I still feel like a lot of times the cutaways would be awkwardly inserted, or it would be like Madame Web being like, let me tease the next thing. I don't feel any of that sort of awkwardness here.
No, I don't either. But again, it's similar to what I was saying earlier in the episode, Dan. Is this a case that this comic is just some kind of exceptional artistry of storytelling, or is it that it's doing something right that used to be done right a lot on this comic book, but what has not been done right in a very long time? I mean, like, like, yes, Dan Slott was the king of like creating plots and doing lots of stuff, but you can go back over the last 12 years of our show and hear plenty of times we were just like, this just feels overstuffed, or we're introducing new things in the final act that we didn't introduce before, or we're things are happening off panel because, like, it's just like Dan Slott ran out of room. Obviously you alluded to the Nick Spencer thing where, like, oh, we're gonna introduce Craven again and just keep doing the same motif issue after issue after issue, and not really do anything,
Yeah.
or like end an issue with a kindred alert, where Kindred is like, planning to do something, and this is the issue where I'm gonna get him, and then
Yeah.
no, he didn't get him. Like, yes, this is like, these are stories that are being organically woven together, a la what Jerry Conway was doing in Spectacular and Web of, and like, PS, like, Jerry Conway was doing that stuff, like, like it was, in his sleep, basically, on the 2B books at the time. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. Like, yes, it's great that we're getting a comic book story like this again, and I really want to be happy about it, and I am. But at the same time, like, like I feel like the bar had been set so low over like, look, I've liked a lot of issues of this comic book series over the last 10 years, but I think, like, the body of work as a whole has been kind of mediocre for a while now, because there have been some very discernible issues that were not being addressed, and we've talked about them over and over again, and it seems like, at least through 4 comics here, that we're finally starting to address it and move in a positive direction. We'll see if it goes in through issue 5. I mean, like, there's always time to get the rug pulled out from underneath us, or Charlie Brown to miss the football, but for now it seems to be moving in the right direction, and like, I want to be happy about it, and we can call it out as being praiseworthy, but I also don't want to elevate it too far in a way, because I feel like this is what the comic should be doing
Sure.
anyway. You know what I mean? Like, this is what it used to do all the time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, like, I don't want to like say that this is like the best thing since, like, like the invention of sliced bread,
Right.
but at the same time, I want to keep in mind that, like, when Jerry Conway was writing Spectacular and Web of, Amazing wasn't doing what he was doing. You
No,
know,
no, but then Amazing had Todd McFarlane and was just changing, and new villains and other stuff. So, like,
Yeah, yeah. Look, I mean, it's a balance, and maybe there's some B books that are right now that are doing some of the stuff that we liked. I mean, I don't really think any are, but
no, well, right.
yeah. I mean, like, maybe Ultimate Spider-Man is that. Like, you and I don't really love the writing, but we think the art is really great.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, maybe that's the sort of like David Michelinie, Todd McFarlane book right now. I don't know. I'm trying to make a tortured comparison, perhaps. But when people get put on this book, it's usually because they're amongst the top, in the industry,
Right.
and for whatever reason, like, someone who I thought was like a surefire hit and was my top choice for the book, Nick Spencer, was almost exclusively misses. Like, for me, and yet, like, something is working here. I don't think it's just that, like, suddenly the office decided to, like, prioritize something differently. Like, this is an approach to this book that is more classical, and but even then, I think it's doing something more than even the best of the classic Spider-Man did. It's swinging for something. Like, I think the sort of stuff with Peter in middle school, like, it's fairly profound in terms of its like meaning for the character, in a way that, like, a lot of other, like, kind of like the 70s 80s Spider-Man, as great as the construct of all that was, and as effortless as it was, like, I don't think was really, like, oftentimes leaning this hard into telling us something really personal and interesting about Peter Parker.
Yeah, look, I feel like this is a phrase that gets used a lot when, especially at the beginning of a new run with Spider-Man, this like back to basics approach or whatever,
Yeah.
that was like Brand New Day was completely marketed around it. I mean, it was we're back to youth and a single Peter and, whatever. But like that's kind of what this is here. I mean, like
Yeah.
like even if you compare it to the beginning of the Zeb Wells run, we like that story very much. The twist involving the Tombstone and the Rose was a great twist. One of the few times I was like, I did not see that coming, and
Yeah,
that.
this is the best
It,
issue 4 since the last issue 4.
I mean, I was pleasantly surprised, but like at the same time, that first arc, if you put yourself back in that time machine, was still being weighted down by this mystery box. What did Peter do, and why isn't MJ with him anymore? And who's this Paul guy, and why are there kids, and what the what I mean? There was like all this other sound and fury going on in the background of that comic that kind of made it feel like a House of Cards. I can't see the House of Cards right now. It's like, no, we're just telling a straight up story with, like the mystery is why is Hobgoblin poisoning or drugging the soda. But like
And I think we
but
even know the answer to that. Like it's
right.
basically spelled out here. Yeah.
Sure, but I'm just saying. But like that, it is a the mystery is a very straightforward. Supervillains doing bad things, kind of a mystery. It's not. I mean, again, there's another issue, so it remains to be seen. But like, I'm not getting the sense that actually the Hobgoblin isn't drugging the soda. It's Norman Osborn, woo, or like it's it doesn't seem like we're setting up for that or anything bizarre like that. There's, like it's about Peter and his relationships and the traumas of his past and how they guide his actions both as Spider-Man and in his personal life. I mean, it is a back to basics Spider-Man story as you could possibly get in 2025, and without it like being completely regressive and trying to retcon too much. I mean, I guess you could say these flashbacks are a retcon, but it doesn't feel like we're reaching too far here. I mean, like we have not seen much of this era of Peter in the past, and thus far it's all very believable and very, I think, in line with what we've already know about this character. You know what I mean? Like this is like fresh off him losing his parents and having to live with Ben and May. So there was going to be a rebellious time in there. So anyway,
I
I
mean,
just
what the best thing? I think the best retcons are the ones that like you kind of maybe always imagined were there. It
sure.
just was never spelled out.
Yeah.
We could always have imagined that Peter went through a phase like this, but it's the details of the retcon that make it interesting. Like I think the way that he's presenting it, not just through the sort of like formal style of it, but the like specific details of how it played out, I think is interesting too. Um, if we have to kind of like visualize every part of Peter's life from birth to death, which I'm sure eventually we'll get, and some overlap too. Yeah. So let's get into some of the specifics, and I agree with you largely, Mark. But let's get into the specifics of like what's going on in this issue, and I think it starts off with this, picking up where the last one, left off of Hobgoblin arriving and Peter still kind of going through his trip. We get this like big action set piece between Peter and the Hobgoblin, where they're kind of like bickering over like what Hobgoblin's motives are, and he's kind of playing with Spider-Man in some ways. Um, we're gonna get into the story and the writing and all that stuff, but I think first, like this is another like showstopper set piece from Larraz and Marte Gracia, who I think really elevates his art as well. Are there any images, moments? What do you think of this sequence of art?
I mean, Larraz is just a master of his craft right now. I mean, it all kind of just pops for me. His hobgoblin just looks awesome. You know, like menacing and frightening from the flaming sword to the bat wings. I mean, like it's just like you know it kind of shocks me that it's taken us this long to get Larraz on this book. I don't know. I mean, like we're I know he was with X-Men, and I guess I don't know. Is that considered a better gig than Spider-Man? Maybe.
At the time, yeah.
I guess so. Although I feel like obviously the art is always top notch on this book, but man, like he is just someone who was born to do this book. And like he is fast entering the pantheon of Spider-Man artists right now.
I think he's like, and specifically in regards to this sequence, I think he's one of the best action choreographers I've ever seen in comics, especially in the sort of more modern style. I mean, we commended JRJR's like Tombstone Spidey fight, and I think JRJR is really good at that sort of grounded, humanistic thing. But like Laraj takes that, like grounded, really physical nature of JRJR stuff and adds onto it the Todd McFarlane bombastic style, the trails of speed lines, and I love the way that he uses shadow and layout and the balance of the page to like really get that sense of momentum and movement as your eye reads through it. It's really tremendous. I love JRJR, his layouts, his paneling, his everything, the use of close-ups. But this guy is taking it to a whole other level that feels like uniquely Spider-Man with the way that movement is captured. Even just little things like when Spider-Man in this swings away and hides in the shadows up above in, I guess, the rafters. I don't know what you would call it, like from the Hobgoblin, and the light obscures him. Like he's not afraid to let stuff disappear, but it always matches the emotional like through line that the action is an extension of the sort of power dynamics, between the two, and I think that stuff is so tremendous. And then you have like Marte Gracia, like acting like a top of his class cinematographer here with using the flaming sword as the sort of illumination in the scene to contrast the sort of purples and oranges, as his sword illuminates the darkness. That bit where Spider-Man like pulls himself, I don't know if it's under like bathroom stalls or under a vehicle or whatever, and like slides along the ground into the darkness in the foreground as the flaming sword illuminates the room behind him that he just left. It's really dynamic, exciting stuff that is so just interesting to look at beyond sort of who's punching who. All of it is just singing together, and man, I'm thrilled by it. I reread these action scenes multiple times just for the sort of like playing it out in my head. I really could piece it how each piece went from here to there, and it's exciting, and I love seeing Spider-Man actually like utilize all his powers and verticality in a fight. I mean, that Tombstone fight, great fight, but like it's not particularly Spider-Man-y. He's not walking on the walls. He's not firing webs.
Right.
And like
Well,
here, I feel like it's all utilized.
yeah. I mean, Spider-Man Tombstone was like a rock fight,
Yeah,
basically. I mean, which is not something we normally get, but I think that was kind of the impressiveness of it. It was so not it did play against type in a kind of raw way that, and I'm not saying I prefer it to what
sure.
Larraz does here, but I was just saying like that was why it seems so kind of unique and special. It was like, oh wow, we don't normally get a fight like this in a Spider-Man comic where they're just two heavyweights just like pummeling each other and making and you're wondering if one of those punches is gonna break somebody's skull the way it was going. You know what I mean? And Romita captured that perfectly. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
this is
yeah. I don't mean to knock it down, like in that regard, because like I think the point is that he deliberately doesn't use his spider powers to get the one up on Tombstone. It's a purely man versus man. I'm gonna out you on your own level,
yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Meanwhile, like during this fight, we keep getting Spidey and his hallucinations. I mean, what's your take on the hallucinations still. I mean, I gotta be honest. I was kind of surprised in that, oh, we're still doing this, but I guess it works. I mean, it just feels like this is like a really, a really long tail for a drug soda, I guess. You know what I mean? Like this is, once you drink
Well,
it.
to be clear, like Peter didn't drink the soda. He was like given like
Oh, right. Sorry.
they say specifically that he got a like 100 times more dosage than the rhino,
Sure.
um, which is causing him to see all of these things. Um, I think it's really naturally done here, even if it does feel like a sort of like harsh like interruption sometimes into the scene, or maybe it just feels very tangentially connected. There's the one of like Peter making the joke about like I know what your mom's underwear looks like, which has nothing to do with like the certain current battle, other than maybe there's like a word connection. And Peter is like laughing about it in real time. Oh, that was a good joke, that I made as a kid. Um, like I think that's okay here. I don't think it really breaks up the flow, but I also think that this book has been specifically about interruptions, even from its very opening pages in issue one, where Peter is doing these job interviews and things keep interrupting the success there. And I think that's a deliberate choice to like structure it this way, and it's about how many things he's juggling and why he can't be successful, like even as Spider-Man. So like I think it works in that format. I don't think there's anything quite as profound, at least initially here, as him seeing like Uncle Ben replacing Shay in the previous issue. But I still find it like a very useful you know, technique, in the book to keep us engaged with that flashback story.
Yeah. Well, you alluded to it earlier, Dan. We started to get some of Hobgoblin's plot lines here. So what's going on here? You like, he's making a point of telling Spider-Man, "Oh, you're gonna die before you find out," but we're kind of finding out.
Yeah, I mean, he outright says it. I think, like the cure stuff being the sort of like nod to. And the book starts off at Rand, where first of all Brian confirms that Peter is drugged, which we the audience don't need to know. But I think the implication there is that Brian knows Peter is drugged because he like eats the mushroom and realizes that it cures whatever it is. And then we get that confirmation at the end of the issue. And, Hobgoblin says, like, why would I bottle anxiety in a can? And I think, and then he uses the word specifically like big pharma later in the issue. And I suspect, if we're, especially if we're leaning into the themes that Joe Kelly has kind of set up with this whole of like oligarch corporate villain thing, that, it seems to me that like Hobgoblin must have some sort of buy-in with big pharma, whether it's stock or he's himself is going to get into the big pharma market and sell the cure to this thing and just keep pumping anxiety into the people of New York so he can sell them like this cure-all drug. But whatever it is, I imagine it's for some kind of profit.
I don't know, Dan. Sounds pretty political to me. Yeah, no, I mean, it's, and it's a plot that certainly like tracks for Kingsley in terms of kind of where that character's arc has been taking him over the last few years. I mean, I will say this: I prefer something nefarious like this to Hobgoblin is just like, selling more supervillain personalities and costumes to people. You know what I mean? Like this is, I
Mm-hmm.
think, again, like I appreciate that we're naturally taking this character in a direction that is both within the character, but at the same time, something new.
Yeah, and
And
it leans into that sort of question of like, will we ever cure cancer because it's too profitable for like pharma and all of these other industries that are based around curing cancer? And I think the most interesting thing about it is like the sort of use of East Harlem as the testing ground for this. Like you go after the sort of lower like income minority class, and use them as your sort of testing grounds, as like has been done throughout American history, like by companies, whether it be like, like 3M doing, sort of like non-stick PFOAs, in West Virginia, and seeing the results of that. And, this to me is an extension of all of that. And so therefore rings very true. And you're right. I think feels better, not only better than him selling costumes, which I think was great because he was a fashion guy when he started, but like also way better than like Hobgoblin Hired Assassin, which I
Right.
think he kind of became during the DeFalco Friends run. And that always felt weird to me. Like I always felt he was too Machiavellian to kind of like go along with
Yeah.
that role for himself. And I'm curious to see like the final details of this as it gets revealed.
Yeah. Any other speculation about the Rand slash Cola subplot here?
Well, I mean, I thank you for introducing that. I had mentioned on the previous episode, like, hey, like, are we going to find out what it is that Peter has to contribute to Rand, or like how he's keeping his job? And I think the implication here, based on the updates, is one, he's going to get like out of this because they've proven that he's been on drugs this whole time. But like also that could inadvertently like he says at the end, I found the antidote. Well, that means there's something for them to sell, or something for them to, I don't know the nature of they're probably like a nonprofit, right? Like they're doing these things, they say, for holistic
Right.
or community healing reasons. And I guess the Rand Enterprises don't need any more money given Danny Rand's background.
Hmm.
Um, but it seems like at least this offers a pathway for Peter to contribute in a way that makes sense for him to like actually be there. How long that can be sustained as a sort of like Spider-Man led me to this thing, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm glad it came back around at least here and is starting to maybe heal that gap.
This did feel now. Granted, I mean, it feels like he got a little bit of a reprieve in this issue, but like we were headed towards a pretty quick fall from grace from Peter here. I was a little surprised. I was a little surprised just how like how ready it was. Like, all right, we got to fire this guy. I was like, oh, all right. I mean, like we're not gonna let it play out a little more, but I guess we're gonna let it play out a little more. But
How much do you want to read into the bit with the boss where Brian says like, well, hey, like, someone in this room that's not me has a spotty track record of showing up to work on time. And
yeah,
like my spidey sense immediately went to, oh well, what is she doing with her mornings other than super villaining?
right, right, of
Like
course.
I'm just ready to label everyone at Rand Enterprises a villain, and Brian seems to have kind of skirted that, at least for now, given that his mushrooms seem to have like positive impacts. But
Yeah.
yeah.
This is
Anyway,
we got the Kindred 2.0 we were always looking for, Dan. I mean,
yeah, I'm on the spot, like on the lookout for the lookouts. But
yeah, yeah.
speaking of other villains, let's talk about Itsy Bitsy here, who kind of has a sort of new, like kind of like elevated role here, or at least it's like shit or get off the pot. Like you got to kill Spider-Man now, or you're dead. What do you think about that?
I I look, I mean, if if I'm gonna single out the weak spot of this arc, it's to me it's still itsy bitsy. Like I just don't fully understand the alliance with Hobgoblin here. And yes,
Hmm.
if Kingsley does have some kind of control over her, or like marker he's calling on her or so, then it's like, then why hasn't she just killed like she's had multiple
Yeah.
opportunities to kill Peter over the last four issues, and like I feel like we're creating every excuse that we can to not do it, which is also very comic booky, but like it's I like I said, this is the weak part of the story for me. I also just like, you know not to jump around too much, but like the conclusion with Itsy Bitsy here, with Peter saying thinking it's his vision with Aunt May saying I love you," and like her getting like all kind of like a tither about it, and then like literally turning into the alien, the predator monster to like
Yeah.
I was just like, it's just it's I appreciate that we're adding some levity here, but like I honestly like everything with Itsy Bitsy. I'm like, I just want more Roderick Kingsley here,
Yeah.
or like another like hardcore Spider-Man villain that we know and love, not this Joe Kelly creation that like I had forgotten about and feel like I'm being forced to remember right now.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem necessarily with her, but like, I need to know like the specifics of like what is going on because it's like she loves Spider-Man, but she won't kill him, but now she will because he'll, kill her. Like, just tell me that she has a bomb in her head, and Kingsley's gonna force her to do it if he finds out, and so she's trying to warn Peter because she does care about him and stay away from me, stay away from this. It just needed something a little bit simpler. And I agree with you. I think this is the weakest part of this book. Although I do think the visuals are really great. I love the predator mouth thing. I think it's really cool. And it's a better look, I think, than the sort of like uh, finger mouth thing, bug thing. I don't even know what the word is for it that we saw in like Spider-Man Deadpool 10 when her mask was first kind of taken off. And like I said earlier, I thought it was smart to kind of swap the villains, but she doesn't really add anything to me more than she kind of confuses me about like how does she actually feel about all of this? What makes this situation but like different
Mm.
for her? Like he told her to kill him before. I guess the direct threat is more is finally pulled out here. And then I don't even know if I really care all that much, just in general, about her. Whether the motivation is one thing or the other, it just needs to be more
You know,
clear. The thing that it reminds me most closely of is like early Black Cat, the sort of like, well, if I can't have you, I'll kill you kind of thing. But that was
right.
much more streamlined. Like I got those dynamics on the page. Um, uh,
This it's I think this is just a hopped up character, Dan. I mean, that's the
yeah,
thing. Like it's not supposed to make sense, which is it's a choice. But like everything else, we're talking about a storyline where the main character has essentially become an unreliable narrator because he's high as a kite throughout it, and yet I feel like that is more consistent and has more logic to it than like everything having to do with Itsy Bitsy. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like we don't know what Itsy Bitsy's motivations are. We don't know why Itsy Bitsy is there. We don't know why of again like okay you sure it's a Joe Kelly creation. He's gonna in the same way that Zeb was gonna use what's it Wyatt or whatever Wyatt
YF, yeah.
when we were all just like, holy crap, like the character from Brand New Day. I mean, it's like the character from Spider-Man Deadpool. Okay. I mean, like obviously this is what creators do. And yet I'm like, but why Kingsley? Like that was never. I just don't think it's established. It's been strongly established why the two of them would be working together. And when you have a
Yeah.
character that's a classic rogue like Kingsley, you want a reason. You know what I mean? Like okay, well, why? Like you said, Kingsley is a loner, so it's like I would
How
almost
did these two get mixed up together?
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I would almost be more believable. It was like, okay, I have like the new version of the Grizzly and and Boomerang working for me instead of Itsy Bitsy to like do my to do the hand to hand stuff so then I can take off and fly and kill Brian. You know what I mean? Like it just like it doesn't fully make sense to me. And and I just kind of want to be past it.
Yeah, I mean, like, because she's operating in the role of like the heavy, right? She's
Yeah.
just like the enforcer, like so.
Right.
Then make it the enforcers,
Right.
right?
Right.
And instead she has this elevated role of like some kind of spurned lover, clone daughter thing, and it's just the story doesn't necessarily need it. Now, like if we come to find out that whatever they're using to like put in the soda is derived from Itsy Bitsy in some way, and like they're able to tie it in, then maybe that like makes up for it in some way and makes her feel more essential to the story. But right now, it still feels like too tangential to like really kind of settle in and not distract from the overall whole.
Yeah.
To me, though, it's she's still just a heavy, and so I've enjoyed the sort of visualization of her, and the writing is but like it's been fine. It doesn't really detract super heavy, but it is the sort of like Achilles heel if if there need be one in this particular comic.
Yeah.
Let's get into the sort of the star of the show in this, which is hard to say given like that like the Hobgoblin fight happens in this. So I suspect we're going to get another one in the next issue, the sort of final one. But these flashbacks, eventually culminate here in some way. And in the previous issue, we saw May like prepping to give Peter a big speech outside his bedroom, and she opens the door, and he's gone and fled the house. And here we eventually get the reveal of like that kind of interaction where she can finally speak her emotions to him in some way, but it's all like preempted by this, as you said very smartly, a literal floating heads of guilt scene here,
Yeah.
because they are suspended in water for whatever reason, maybe other than to just make them literal floating heads of guilt. I don't know that there's much to say narratively about this, but like, what did you think of these images that are given real full pages to play out?
Oh yeah, I mean, and I'm not just saying this because, Dan's notes say this, sausage making alert, but like, I was immediately brought back to like Marcos Martin and No One Dies in terms of like just the overall visual artistry of how these, because we've seen the floating heads of shame and guilt
Yeah.
countless times, but like I feel like only a few of those instances have kind of elevated. There's a difference between like what Martine did back in the slot run versus say, I always think of ASM 181 with Marv Wolfman and like him just standing at the gravestone like like I don't know if it's that Ross Andrew or Keith Pollard, but whatever. So like it's just visually stunning. I mean, it's both very. I feel like it's paying like certainly the MJ and Gwen pay homage to like Romita. I feel like the Ben, Uncle Ben's, Captain Stacy. Well, the Harry Osborn looked like freaking Kindred.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's
I
not
mean,
even
like, yeah,
that's not
not,
even an alarm. That's just like, oh, it's Kindred.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because not all of the characters that appear there are dead. Like
Yeah.
MJ's still alive, and
It-
Chasm, is still with us. But like Harry gets the extra dead treatment in that
yeah.
like the worms are eating
Yeah.
his face. So yes, it immediately screamed Kindred to me, which would mean like two appearances of Kindred in the first four issues of this story, which is not to say it's coming back, but like Kelly is at least interweaving that narrative into the overall mythos
Yeah.
as much as anybody else has since Kindred ended.
I did feel Shay in that mix was a little odd for me because I was just like, like not to like group the people that Spidey killed versus his loves, although you could say he killed Gwen too, or failed her and ended up in her death. But like I just was like, why is Shay grouped with like the Bens and Harry and Captain Stacy versus the loves of his life or so it felt a little out of place for me.
Oh, sure, right. Like you could have included her in the next page as the sort of like love that's yet to be lost kind of thing.
yeah, because like I mean like you know I know, yeah. I mean, it wasn't it's not a perfect analogy. Like, obviously, like Ben Riley, he he hasn't died per se, but he's become,
Again.
yeah,
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
But he's become Chasm, which is like, the Ben Riley we know and tolerated is no more, and now he's Chasm. I don't know. I just like it was odd grouping, and because again, like as great as Larraz is, I am still not used visually to seeing, like Shay. We've seen a lot of different versions of Shay since she was introduced. Like, I don't feel like we have a definitive Shay the way we have a definitive, like, there's no mistaking MJ or Gwen when they appear on the page, especially the way they do here. Whereas Shay, I was like, wait, is that? Oh, that's Shay. Okay, so like I think that's what threw me as well, because I was like, wait, who's this? Oh, it's Shay. So I don't know. It was just an odd choice in the scheme of what the narrative was doing. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I will say I really appreciate like the level of gravity and like frankness that Joe Kelly brought to these pages. Like
Mm,
especially with like Ben Riley and Chasm, where it like just lays out like, I was your brother and you still had other priorities. And it's like, okay, like cool. Let's just go with that and lean into that as the sort of like dark, serious version of Chasm that like I think you and I have been asking for, which is like, if you're going to do this, then let's really lean into whatever the perceived slight was. And I enjoyed just having it laid out before me, like, okay, going forward, this is what we're going with for Chasm,
mm,
whether they stick to that or not. And the same I think is true with the whole like MJ thing, where I was if you remember at the end of the Wells run, I got very upset about like them like kind of leaving the door open for
right.
MJ. And I'm not saying that this page necessarily closes that door, but the frankness with of which like you've lost your like the love of your life twice.
Right.
It's like, okay, cool. Let's make that a definitive chapter. Like that's a thing that happened, and let's just put it down there and just go with it, rather than like, will they, won't they, blah blah blah.
Well,
You know,
it's worth saying, Dan. Maybe his love with MJ is over, but is his love to Venom? Could that become something new?
I mean, we don't know. But like, I just liked seeing it like put frankly there as like, nope, like we like this is a part of Spider-Man's history now.
Right.
Like he lost MJ in addition to Gwen, and now that reflects onward to Shay. Even if you felt like maybe that should have been included in this layout.
I mean, they could have included Teresa Parker there and been like, he really lost a sister, and someone he
Or
loved
did
like,
he?
and someone he loved like a sister.
Or or a chameleon to bring up that story.
Anyway, okay. Let's talk about I won't say my favorite part, but I think the most visually fun part was young Peter drinking for the first time with the Fantastic
Yes.
Four. I mean, my question is, and it's a live stream, so I might as well ask it. What was he drinking, Dan? No,
A Coors maybe.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, First of all, I thought it was neat that they even were able to showcase this sequence in the book, to show like an underage kid drinking.
right.
Like, I don't know if I would call that like edgy, given all those sort of like violence, that's been throughout this book. On behalf of Itsy Bitsy and things like that. But something about this still felt like kind of like I hate the word edgy, but it felt like it was doing something uh, like to kind of like push on the icon of Spider-Man a little bit. Like, he was a kid that drank underage.
Yeah,
I don't think we've seen many interpretations of Peter like doing things underage that like you would call in the real world sort of a crime,
right.
or something that the parents would shy you away. In some ways, you're tarnishing the sort of like do-gooder legacy of Spider-Man in some way, and I found this really like refreshing and honest. And I mean, not to mention the layout of it as like the sort of like social dynamics of him like distancing himself from his family and like attacking his parents and Aunt May, and embracing this sort of like I can harm myself, get back at the people who care about me, simultaneously with the sort of silhouette of itsy bitsy pummeling Spider-Man. We talk about Marcos Martin. I feel like that's something he would have done. Like, this is a really, really striking and cool layout and conceived idea on the page.
Yeah, no, for sure. What did you think about some of they're all kind of like venting about their parents here, but Brian takes a kind of a dark turn here. What do you think's being set up for him here?
Yeah, I mean, he suggests, I wish my parents would just die. I don't want to see that. I don't want to find out that Brian like killed his parents, and that's the sort of dark turn for him. I mean, again, I read these books with a sort of like, well, if they set something up like that, like it could definitely go that direction. These words were put on the page for a reason, and I think they work fine without the sort of implication that it could go. But it is comics, and I know that these things tend to, the Chekhovian gun, so to speak. And my hope is, and I think Kelly has shown some restraint thus far, is that these aren't actually Chekhovian guns,
Right.
and that they are just part of weaving a greater narrative tapestry of real emotional pain and an honesty between these characters. And I found that all of that resentment of their parents really rang true, especially for, Brian like being angry at his parents for like condemning him to sort of like a life as a, plumber, so to speak, and that he feels like he could rise above that. And you can see the result of that in, the present day, which is like, I don't know his motives for, becoming a top scientist, but I could also very well imagine someone devoting themselves to science and higher learning, out of spite for their parents and a desire to rise above their class status. I don't know if that's true of Peter necessarily, but like his pain is also, I think, rooted in something very real.
Yeah. Um, I think the do we want to just talk about Peter and May? Because
Yeah,
that's
let's get into it because this to me is the real highlight of this issue. As much as I love the drinking scene,
Mhm.
I think this is I mean, I sent you a text and I was like, I think there's a sequence in this that's as good as anything we got in early JMS. And that's this sequence. I
Yeah.
think this is a beautifully written sequence that pays off like a lot of the setup to this point, and was written like with real honesty that you would see in like a JMS or and not just because it's like similar to the conversation issue. I would also say like Paul Jenkins would like often touch on this kind of emotional honesty, but I think this one is really special because I think it gets at the core of what animates Spider-Man entirely, and that like what we're actually witnessing here is something far more formative than just why Peter doesn't drink alcohol. And I found it not only like additive to the sort of like retcon nature, but like additive to my understanding of the character overall.
Okay. Dan, why don't you just lay out what you love so much about it, and then I will come in with my cold water that
Okay.
I plan on doing because
Okay.
spoiler alert.
Yeah. I mean, look. I think this first off, on the most surface level, I think this is a relatable scene for anybody who was a teenager who drank. And I'll admit that's not me, but like I get it. I was pretty straight edge and.
Well, that makes one of us, Dan. So there you go.
I mean, I don't know, Mark. Did you have this sort of porcelain god moment with your parents at your
uh,
house growing up?
it might have been out the side of my dad's car, but anyway.
Okay, fair enough. The asphalt gods.
There
You
you
know what? Like
go.
all gods must be worshipped in due time. But
Yes.
and on top of that, like I'm not adopted, but like again, I think I mentioned on a previous episode, I have an adopted, sibling, and I think the sort of feelings that are expressed here about being a sort of orphaned or adopted child are all very true, and especially May's reaction, which is a sort of reaction that parents of adoption are actually kind of told that like because this kind of scenario happens with a lot of adopted kids, and if you look into the data on it, I believe that adopted children are 40% more likely to drop out of high school than non-adopted children, and a lot of that I think has to do with this sort of like abandonment complex, and so obviously the reaction as a teenager to any kind of hurt is to push back the other way. It's the whole like adage of like my parents are super Orthodox Christian, so I'm gonna go and party it up and sleep with everybody that I know because I need to push back against
Right.
their authority. And I think you can see that here. But like May's offering of like I'm just gonna love you no matter what, and that's like what I can offer, is the sort of advice that I think most parents are given to kind of guide kids through this, and that felt really like honest and true. Like as kind of pushing back against Peter's feelings of abandonment, and that May and Ben will leave him too. Um, but like it also informs like, oh well, no wonder Peter reacted how he did to Uncle Ben's death. Like this has been something that's been active in his mind all along. Is like I can't stand to lose another person, and I will distance myself from them if I have to, because I can't stand that pain in some way. And it's also no wonder why like Peter hasn't told May that he's Spider-Man out of a fear of losing her too, But in the process, and I think this has been true over this book, whether it's a meta text or not, I think it's been true of this book that he's pushed her away and isolated her this whole process, right? The same woman that told him that she would love him no matter what, he hasn't let her in on his like deepest, darkest secret because he's afraid of losing her, whether it's due to a heart attack in the Ditko era, or all of that. And you might say by the end of the sequence, he learned his lesson, in some way to, you know, allow himself to embrace May and accept that lesson of like of her love for him. But it's an ongoing thing that he's been struggling with all of his love life, with his role as Spider-Man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like, yes, this is the setup for why Peter doesn't drink beer. But I also think it's like the first, like, you could imagine this happened like in the past and you could read into this. But like, I think this is a really formative moment that really underlines the, like, all of the actions that Peter does as an adult that he's still struggling with and has to try to find a way to heal.
Gotcha. All right. So let me throw some things out there. The first thing I want to point out, something that I really appreciated, that was done in this sequence is, I like the fact that it was May who had this moment with Peter, because I feel like, in the past, even in the comics that we really love, like the Paul Jenkins run is a great example. It's
Yeah.
like, it seems like these moments of like connection and understanding and emotional resonance were really always kind of cited in Ben and Peter. And I think a lot of like Peter's the relationship with May has always been defined by the fact that Peter's failings with the burglar has essentially widowed his his aunt, who, and now like he's responsible for her, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it was nice to kind of see like, no, like there is more to that relationship, even in what has happened in the years following the death of Uncle Ben. So like I just appreciated that we got that little layer, of characterization between the two, because frankly I don't think it's something even some of the best writers of Spider-Man, have really attempted to tell that story between these two characters. Like, why exactly, besides the fact that Peter's failings widowed his aunt, like why do these two truly love each other the way they do? Because it always seems like it's Ben who was both the father figure, but also the wise man, the sage, the one who is always kind of pushing Peter down the right path, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, like it lifts Aunt May out of sort of like the second class parent status. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, she had like a key role in his formation as well.
Yeah, and not I know you kind of opined about your own personal life here. I mean, I'll use that, like, as my son gets older, when my son was younger, my wife was, the sun and the moon and the stars to him, and I've noticed now as he's gotten older, I've I've emerged out of the second class parent status, and now there are things that I can bond with him more, and, like, we clearly established in the previous issues here that Ben was not in the headspace to deal with Peter, Ben, the rule follower, the police, who the military person who knew the police, wasn't capable of empathizing with Peter, a Peter who wanted to get drunk with his friends and break the law and be a bad person. You know what I mean?
Even
Like,
in this issue, like Ben says, like, this is more than hormones. Like, what
yeah,
if we're not like up
yeah,
to the challenge of raising this kid? And that's the
yeah,
thing that gets Peter to run away.
yeah,
Um, and like, it's interesting that like May has always kind of been like you talk about the gumption
yeah,
moment a lot. Like, like Ben may have brought the sort of lessons about power and responsibility, but May really brings the sort of like unending love element of the equation.
yeah. All right. So I got that out of the way. I don't know if this is a shit sandwich per se, because I'm about to, that was the good part. Now
Sure. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
to throw two things, not criticisms, but just commentary, a pushback against what you just said.
Sure.
The first thing was, this idea of this unpeeling this new layer to Peter about not wanting to about pushing away things that he loves out of fear of abandonment and whatnot. And it's a good um it's a good bit of characterization. It makes sense. Here's my thing, like, how is this how is this any different than power and responsibility for him? I mean, in terms of what is guiding his motivations, and decisions in his personal life, and how he balances things. Him him not wanting to tell. For years, I've always interpreted him not telling Aunt May his secret was just as much about the fact, again, he failed to use his power responsibly, which led to the death of Uncle Ben, and thus widowed his Aunt May and made her weaker, and she's on his own, and she's already frail, and she doesn't take her heart medication, she's going to die. And now that I have this other secret, if I tell her that I am being irresponsible, I'm going to kill her dead because she can't handle the shock of that. I can't, I must keep this secret. It's the responsible thing to do. It's within my power to do this. That is always how I've interpreted that. And I guess that's the thing. It's like this is a good bit of characterization, but I don't know if it's necessarily additive to who Peter is. I feel like this has been defined about Peter already, in terms of, why he has to keep people at an arm's length, and why he sometimes shuts himself in. I mean, it's a different medium, but, like, Sam Raimi, I felt, captured this very, very well
Yeah.
in the Spider-Man movies. This idea of, like, no, I can't enjoy these things because my responsibility first and foremost is to being this Spider-Man, because I have to be Spider-Man. I got this power, and the one time I didn't use this power resulted in the ultimate tragedy, and now I have to spend the rest of my life atoning for that.
Can,
So
can I can I respond to that?
sure.
Yeah, I mean, really quickly, and I don't even know if like what I'm about to say is like honestly like in keeping with the sort of thematic ideas of Spider-Man, but like I think there's the idea here that like this is a moment where like Peter can realize like he doesn't have to be the only strong person, that like these people in his life, like, you know, whether he chooses to like burden them with his problems or not, like he has whatever time he has with them, and if he keeps them at arm's length that whole time, he'll never really get to kind of like spend or cash in on that relationship. And it takes the like the burden of that responsibility and shares it a little bit. Like May is here in this scene, like not like holding Peter's hair back, like
Right.
necessarily, but like
But
she's there to kind of like
thematically. Yeah.
Yeah, like comfort him and support him in that role in the same way that she is as an adult when he shows up in the apartment covered in water after swimming in the river and lets him pass out on the bed, right? Like would that burden or that responsibility be better shared with a woman that can know what's going on? I'm not arguing for him to reveal his identity necessarily, but I think it's like hinting towards the idea that like you're actually selling us short as equally strong people that can choose to be a part of your life and shoulder that burden, and like we're already helping you in ways, but you are keeping it as us at an arm's length. And meanwhile, May has her own life going on. Like at the beginning of
Sure.
like issue one, she's like, Peter, I want to introduce you to someone. We don't find out who that is, but we see people coming over to her apartment to enjoy like a TV show night together. She's living her whole life, but Peter is living this completely separate life
Right.
that can't be joined because there's this thing between them.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but here, and again, maybe this is just interpretation, but like, you know, I saw that moment and that exchange as kind of being like what set Peter on the right path with May and Ben to get us to the point of the relationship that we saw at the opening of Amazing Fantasy 15, which was a very functional relationship between
Yeah.
a an orphan child and his surrogate mother and father who happened to be his aunt and uncle. And then the death of Uncle Ben due to Peter's failings reset that onto the current trajectory, which brings us back to power and responsibility. So like I don't like it's a good scene, and it's a good scene that I think fills in the gaps of wow, Peter was really on a bad path here. How did we get him back on the right path so that we saw the kid that we saw at the beginning of the Dicko and
Yeah.
Stan Lee years? This speech is what did it, but I don't. I guess this what I'm trying to say, Dan, is I don't see this speech as being some kind of like groundbreaking new way of looking at Peter and Peter's shortcomings, and even how Peter has been over the last couple of years. I don't think I don't. It doesn't move the needle enough for me. I don't think the work has been done to be like, oh, it's just because Peter is constantly pushing people away. No, I think Peter is dysfunctional because Peter got powers, screwed up. His uncle died, and he's been atoning for it ever since. It doesn't matter what else happened to me at that point. Like that will always reign supreme as what is the guiding principle for Peter and Peter's sometimes absent-mindedness or poor social behavior or bad relationships. It's because he's Spider-Man, and that always has to come first in his life. Like I guess
I
that's
think
what.
that's a really valid critique.
Yeah,
I think that this, like say this story comes after like Spider Island, right? Like
sure.
where like, Carly leaves him because he wasn't willing to open up about a secret or something. I think it would feel much more appropriate. Like I think you're right that like the idea of a Peter that is pushing people away has not been necessarily established by this run. I mean, maybe the stuff with Shay where he keeps abandoning her, instead of
Right.
allowing that to develop. But that is, a trope that we've seen a lot. And I think Joe Kelly is leaning a lot on the sort of like history and idea of Spider-Man instead of like reestablishing it in here. And I think that's an absolutely apt critique, like of this scene. But I do think that like what we're seeing is and again, I think you leaned into it too, which is this is not corrective of you in any way, is that you saw a person in pain from the death of his parents and trying to find his place in the world and going through teenage years. And this is a moment of healing that you're right, is going to get us towards where we were in Amazing Fantasy 15. And then the death of Uncle Ben is like a hard reset to that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's right back to losing a parent again.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm seeing is, especially as reflected by the Peter passing out at May's apartment, is he needs to go through the path of rehealing that again, just as he did here, And so my like final challenge to this office and team
I'm not.
is
I'm not done, Dan.
okay, no, but
Yeah.
I just want to say this because it fits here. I
Okay.
know it's lower in the notes, but
Okay.
like my challenge would be like, okay, like you've done this in the past, show us this in the present, right? Like make me feel the emotions that I felt reading this page for modern Peter and prove to me that you can allow him to change in the way that you're allowing this past Peter to change. Because until you can do that, it will always keep me at an arm's length from this modern version of the character who hasn't been allowed to grow, right? If all the growth is going to happen in the past, that's going to be really annoying. And so, like, I want to see that reflected into the future. Okay, that aside, Mark, continue with your like why
Right.
this didn't connect for you. Yeah.
And I guess that point is maybe dovetails with my second point here, which was like, okay, so my first was that I just don't see this as an additive character development that could usurp power and responsibility as a guiding principle. But the second part of it is, like, yes, this was a great scene, and you know, I love that we're getting these intimate moments that we have not gotten in years. With that said, like, what what does any of this have to do with Roderick Kingsley, Itsy Bitsy, Queen's Cola being drugged, and Kingsley working a plot to take down Big Pharma or make them, make them buy a cure, whatever. Like, it's as good of a scene as it is. It's also kind of tangentially added in to the story. Like, I feel like uh, this scene was written independent of the actual comics that
Yeah.
we're experiencing here. And the obvious connection that people are going to draw when they're talking, and you've alluded to it already on this episode, when you talk about like the great scenes of the past between Peter and May, the conversation with J. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr. back in 2001. And like that whole issue and sequence was the culmination of a Peter who is absolutely like, scraping the bottom of the barrel of his life, basically being hunted by this monster Moreland. And, we even get this scene where he just like, calls up May and leaves her a voicemail that's like, I'm gonna probably die, but I love
Yeah.
you. And then him succeeding by poisoning his own blood to trick Moreland, and then stumbling back home and just in sheer exhaustion and pain and agony passing out with his Spider-Man costume on, and May discovering him and thus leading to the conversation. And it was a very organic and natural culmination of a story that took place over 6 or 7 arcs, that was both tied in to the main Spider-Man arc, but also brought us to this sensational intimate moment between these two characters that we've known for years. And that to me is why that story is always going to stand alone, and like you're never going to top it, and you're never going to touch it. And even moments like this, it's always going to be, this was good, this was probably one of the better scenes we've had with Peter and May since the conversation. But
Yeah.
it's not the conversation, it's not JMS. I'm sorry, it's just not like I'm enjoying the character work here, as much as I've had since the JMS era. But the JMS era was a whole other elevation of it, and that's the
Yeah.
thing. Like we're like, again, we are making the bar seem so high here, when the issue has been the bar was just so low for the last
Yeah.
10, 15 years with these characters. And it just was. So like, I this was a great comic. I will, like, look, we got several, who knows how long this run's going to last. Let's see what happens to end this arc that brings this all together. Let's see if they respond, if the Spider Office responds to your challenge of like making this about growth, not just from the past but into the future. Like, then hey, we can go back and look on this and be like, wow, this run was truly phenomenal. But the fact of the matter is, like, I cannot 4 issues in 2025 with Joe Kelly writing and Nick Lowe as the editor of this book even fathom saying something was as good as J. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr. I just can't. I'm sorry. So
Yeah. Yeah. Look, like
that's where I land here.
I'm prone to hyperbole. I
Yeah.
think that's been like well documented, like on the podcast. And like I just think like this scene in isolation is like, like just like really sensitively like handled. And I agree with your criticism of like what does this thematically have to do with the other struggles that are going on in the book. And I think Joe Kelly does a lot to tie it in as best he can, you know, like this, even down to the implications of like, hey, when you're drugged, like it starts tying things from your memory together that maybe don't connect, you know, and like, and I think in another voice, I would say, well, just pointing out the problem with your story doesn't make it okay, you know, and so like, you know, I'm going to say that as as fictional me, as I've also fictionally characterized Dan Slott on the podcast. And so, like, I agree with you. You know, like, but I also think like, there's enough there, like, for me to connect it and like to feel that emotion in the moment. You know, and again, there can only be one conversation, right? You kind of only get to do that once, in the same way that you only get to kill Aunt May once, and whatever comes after with her, if she dies again, will only be, you know, a reflection of what JMD, you know, did in issue 400. And there is a sort of novelty to a first, but also that in both instances, the conversation and Aunt May's death, it's like, if you're going to write it as best as you possibly could, that's kind of how you would do it, you know? And so, yes, it will pale, you know, and the construct isn't there. And, you know, we'll see if he does reveal his identity to May after this, or wherever path this is going down. But I still think like the sort of idea of his brain firing off on this formative moment in thinking about Hobgoblin and going and killing his friend, especially since his friend was involved in this moment, it doesn't truly feel to me out of left field in the narrative to do this, even if he had to kind of go a few extra steps to make it work. I think your critique is totally valid, but I think it also worked for me and didn't feel
Yeah.
as riveted together as maybe it did for you.
I am excited to be reading a comic book that I think is just inherently enjoyable and seems to want to say something about Peter Parker again. So like I celebrate that. This is not, you know, this is a criticism coming from a place of I like this a lot, but I'm not ready to put this in an upper pedestal of Spider-Man stories just yet, which is kind of an odd argument to be having with somebody. But like
Yeah.
that's really, you know, again, I cannot be clearer with people about that. That's where this is coming from. This is not a I didn't like this at all, and I think you're stupid for enjoying it. This is just like I enjoyed this a lot. I don't think this can be entered into that conversation just yet. Like
Yeah.
there is a lot of runway in front of us right now that needs to be addressed before we can start having those conversations. And you know, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, you know, shame on Niccolo. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I've been fooled a lot. I thought, I mean, you know, gang war, first strike. Man, we're getting this real emotional story with stakes and Randy Robertson's in the hospital, and oh man, like this book is great. And that, like, you know, two issues after that, I was like, all right, well, I don't like gang war much.
Well,
So-
I'm very excited to get to issue 5 and like see if this can land. And I feel like if it can, like, will that start to temper your approach into sort of optimism?
sure. I mean,
It could.
it could.
How do you undo 10 years in a single story?
like
Yeah.
we need to see consistent, and like I think your challenge is the key, Dan. I like all right, we're finally telling stories that focus on Peter and are, you know, focusing on character moments between Peter and other people. Um, but you know, we're still kind of like showing the growth in past tense, and we have not had growth in present tense or future tense in over a decade. We just, you know, so like that's what needs to start changing before I can be like, oh, okay, you know, like
Yeah.
what is, and that's frankly why I also criticize what I criticize, which is like, okay, this was a great scene, but like, how is this actually going to play into how Spider-Man saves the day? You know
Yeah,
what I
no,
mean? Like
I mean, I wouldn't have issued the challenge if I didn't agree with you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
the character has to come alive.
Yeah. Let's get to our grades here before we lose the entire East Coast of our viewers here.
Yeah. Look, I know, like, we do this issue by issue. Like, I could very well give the next issue an F. Like, just like I had optimism in Eight Deaths that like Peter was going to learn a lesson there, and then it just veered off and said, actually, no, we're doing something completely different. But I'm giving this one an A. There have been few Spider-Man comics that have pulled at my heartstrings quite like this, that aren't called Ultimate Spider-Man, or Volume 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man, because I don't know what's going on in Volume 3 of Ultimate Spider-Man right now, in that, like, it's a confused book in my mind. But that's a whole other thing. This one genuinely got me from the art, the action, and this scene. I've been thinking about this book all week, and maybe it's just excitement about having Peter return to the masthead, but it's a solid A for me.
and I'm going to give it a B plus, just because I'm a jerk. But and I will say again, if I can get a B plus Amazing Spider-Man for the next 3 years, I would be a very happy man because I don't feel like we've gotten B plus Spider-Man for several years now.
And look, I really appreciate that, Mark, because like I think this is the appeal of like listening to like a Spider-Man dedicated podcast, with like hosts like us. Which obviously I'm gonna pat myself on the back because like uh, I'm obviously horribly like biased, but like this kind of like niche articulation of of this is not something I would expect like sort of a general comic reviewer to like lobby at a title like this. But for people that have been covering this book for 12 years and reading it for God knows how much longer, like, I think that's like, I really appreciate your insight and hesitancy about it, because it comes from a real like fan and critic's background who's really stuck around something for a long time. It's not a conversation that like I would expect other places to have, in this kind of way. So I just wanted to say I appreciate you going out there because I think most people are going to probably echo my sentiments, but like I think you're really on to something, in the way that you kind of hesitate on these things.
There you go. Me hedging is, I'm casting a new path or something. I don't know. Let me take us into the bridge here, Dan. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode, but we want to thank you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk. This podcast exists because of the support of our listeners on Patreon, where, for only $4.99 a month, the cost of a new comic, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews, the same week the comics release, the first 9 episodes of season 7 of our show, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses, all on the Patreon.
Yeah, and if you value smart comics criticism and historical analysis, we hope you'll consider supporting us on Patreon. What we do on the show, as I said, is admittedly niche, super niche. We're an hour and a half into a conversation about a 21-page comic book where we just argued over themes and how things are attached together. Still, if you find our Spider-Man commentary and community valuable, truly, we can only continue doing what we do with your support on Patreon. We have to justify this to our wives that we spend the time doing this that we do.
There you go. Thank you to everyone who supports us in our work. If you want to join their ranks, please go to amazingspidertalk.com and click the Patreon button to sign up to join our club.
And as always, Patreon allows us to maintain our excellent production team. Rick Coast edited this podcast. Alex Galucky edited the video version of the show, which is available on YouTube and has been live this time. And Alex has been live manning the producer role on this show. So thank you again to him for there. please go to YouTube and subscribe so you can find out when our next live shows are. Our artwork is handcrafted by artists Ron Friend, Sal Buscema, and Nick Cagnetti. And lastly, Rylan Bojack, Tony Thaxton, Spider Madge, and Josh Sutton produced our animated introduction and theme songs. So, Mark, until you, me, our good friends Brian Jacob and Alan Churstall form our own Freaktastic Four and go drinking down by the water runoff pipes, which admittedly sounds kind of like a fun idea, what's our motto?
Oh man, Dan, the trouble we'd get into. With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
Awesome. Well, Mark, we're going to end this episode as we have been with this run of talking about what's been going on in our Slack. And you and I, always a little bit late to this, to the theater stuff, got it to finally see Thunderbolts. And I wanted to talk very briefly about like our thoughts on that movie because we're running long here, and where it kind of sits for us in our own kind of pantheon of Marvel movie rankings and stuff like that. So, Mark, what'd you think of Thunderbolts now that, this is still a hot topic, I guess?
Yeah, I guess. I will say I always hesitate to talk movies with you because, unlike comics, I feel like, I don't know, man.
The roles are reversed.
I often like stuff, and you're like, oh God, let me poke 900 holes in why you like that. But anyway.
None of this matters, folks. It's just opinions.
It's just opinions. I enjoyed Thunderbolts. I frankly, kind of went in with low expectations because, I've been experiencing a fair amount of Marvel fatigue. I didn't even see the latest Captain America movie, which I guess actually not impacted Thunderbolts, but they did make allusions to it, and I was like, oh, I guess I gotta wait for Disney Plus to see what the heck they're talking about with some of this stuff. And maybe it was just not having high expectations opened my mind to just having fun. But like I also felt like we got a lot of character driven stuff in a way that I wasn't expecting it. Like we can Yelena Belova and with Sentry and and I thought I look, it's been some time since I read the Paul Jenkins and Bendis runs involving Sentry and the New Avengers and whatnot. So like, I'm not here to necessarily comment on, wow, it was so comic book accurate and blah 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 blah. But like I did, for a character as powerful and potent as Sentry, I thought they did a good job with it. Like I felt like the threat was established. The arc of the character was interesting to me. Again, like I mean, Elena Belova was the absolute star of this movie in an unexpected way, and like it made me kind of be like, why didn't here, maybe this is my hot take of the episode. I would have preferred her to Black Widow that we got over the course of the Marvel movies. So, it's probably I if you count Spider-Man Far From Home as a phase 4 or 3, whatever Marvel movie,
Do you mean No Way Home?
No, yes, No Way Home. Sorry, yeah.
I just wanted to make sure because I think I thought I knew what you were going to say. So yeah.
No, I was just saying, like, if you count the Spider-Man movies as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe proper, which I guess they are, but like they also kind of feel like their own thing, I would say this was probably like second to that in terms of the post Endgame movies for me. But like if you take the Spider-Man movies, it's probably my favorite Marvel movie that they've done since Endgame. Which is not to say that I thought it was on par with some of the top tier movies they did at and before Endgame, but like this was a very solid, enjoyable comic book movie, and I hope they kind of keep this formula going forward over the next few.
I agree largely with everything you said. I don't think I liked it quite as much as you. To me, it's more of kind of like, I think, middle of the pack. I would put like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness above this, at least for its sort of like fun, kind of like sequences that are really outside of the box and really do unusual things with Marvel. I love Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and think that is just maybe that might be my favorite Marvel movie, period. I think it's a really visually dazzling movie that has like a really solid character arc at the heart of it, and made me cry by the end of it, and has like real like great ideas behind it, like all on its own, which like only makes me more excited for like what James Gunn has to do in the
With
future with
Superman.
Superman and all of DC if
Yeah.
that gets off to a strong start. Um, so like that and No Way Home I think is a superior movie to this one, but like and I think I probably like Shang-Chi more than this, but like it's right there, like with those movies, which is to say I think an absolutely solid adventure, in the Marvel universe. And any scene between Yelena and Alexei, I thought really popped off the
Hmm.
screen. I think both of those actors really embodied those roles, and the scene where she encounters him at his apartment, or I guess not his apartment, his home, um, outside of Baltimore, which was a joke that really landed for me. Um,
Yeah.
like that was maybe like the highlight of the movie to me. It just felt like a really lived-in place for a character to be, and uh, you know, but I found a lot of the rest of it very. I felt like I could see the artifice of it very strongly in a way that like felt like something I would see in a TV show,
Yeah.
and a lot of this felt like sort of like a continuation of that sort of like Marvel has always been sort of the like movies as TV series thing, but I
Hmm.
feel like the production has dipped into the realm of like feeling like TV, like in terms of like its set design and its and things like that. Like there's a moment where they go into the bunker before they know it, they're on a mission, and they just find all of the paperwork for Sentry just like conveniently laid out on the table in
Right.
front of them, and like I feel like the movie is kind of like full of those things to kind of ferry the plot forward, um, and that kind of took me out of the sort of like believability of this world, the sort of like coincidence of like this guy in the limousine just driving up from God knows where, and I just found like a lot of that stuff like fairly convenient. I'll admit I'm not a fan of Julia Louis Dreyfus in this role. I
Get
think sh
out.
I think she's so miscast as this character, and her like secretary that could just like beep boop beep gather whatever information she could possibly want at a whim. These are all nitpicks because like I think the movie really has a cool idea at the heart of it, which is like exploring depression and using the void as a way to kind of get at that. And as a meta commentary on the MCU, like there's an interesting line at the beginning where she says like things have never felt the same since the death of Black Widow.
Hmm.
Which is like a nod to the fact that like COVID derailed all of their plans after Black Widow, and like that stuff is really really interesting, but it still felt to me like the Disney Plus like Marvel that would have just been dumped on streaming, like, and it's still adherent to like the sort of like we've got to bring in the Disney Plus characters, and I'm just like, just give me a really great movie that like really does its own thing. That's the thing that's going to get you out of the slump, and I think this is almost there for me, but like not quite back up on the level that I want from Marvel. Which might sound harsh because I do think the end is great, how it's really a character thing rather than a big battle. I do disagree. I think Sentry's plot is completely skipped over. He goes from being like a sympathetic character to suddenly being something completely different moments later. But it's got a really solid heart at the core of it, and I think that elevates it over a lot of the other stuff. Um, but I think for me, I can't get past the production elements feeling like TV, and it keeps me out of like really embracing it as a movie.
You just want to see Valentina have some juji fruit, don't you?
Yes, I do. I do. If I went out of the theater in the middle of the movie and saw Julia Louis Dreyfus there eating juji fruit, I think I would bump the grade up on this
All right.
considerably for me. So, anyway, good conversation. Yes, we don't always see eye to eye on movies, but I totally get where you're coming from, and wish it had worked as well for me, while also acknowledging the good elements that are there. But these are the kind of conversations we're having on the Slack. People are weighing in on Thunderbolts and all kinds of things. So come join our amazing Spider Slack. There's a link in the description of this episode that'll let you sign up in less than a minute. Come say hi. We'd love to see you there. Tell us what you thought of Thunderbolts or whatever is much more current than this conversation that we're having, because Mark and I are perpetually behind on these things. And we'd love to see you there. And in the meantime, this has been a very long episode. We appreciate everybody who hang around for the live version of this, and we'll talk to you guys in a couple weeks, I guess.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining.